today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
Because it's an incredible gift to be able to literally put anything on the proverbial table. And there'll be people going, yeah, that happens, done it, seen it. How can we help, right?
Yeah.
There's no judgment. The recovery community is like, how do we help you process this? Like, what can we be of service to you?
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Bryan Wempen. Bryan is a speaker and an author. In his latest book, Sober is Better, My Note to Self, Bryan shares his journey into daily drinking and finding his way to living a sober lifestyle. He highlights how awkward, messy, and beautiful addiction recovery is for everyone on this path to sobriety. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm really happy to have you here and so excited and honored that you would come on my show and share your story. So tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write Sober is Better, My Note to Self.
Yeah, so I'd written a previous book in 2015 that was Note to Self. So it's kind of, it was the first in the series. This Sober is Better is the second. Mm-hmm. And really the genesis of all the writing is just sharing my journey through recovery. And if that helps anybody in reading kind of my experience and what I've learned and what I've encountered, how I've grown, how I've relapsed, taken steps forward, backward, it's a pretty messy, weavy path to get to recovery. And then, then you have daily life on to start living. And that's just almost as messy.
Sure.
So yeah, that really truly was that if it can help anybody, and most of all, if it can help myself when I go back and actually read it to see if there was something that maybe helps me out again or gets me back on the path, then I've kind of put it in a place that I can do that too. So it's kind of selfish, at the core right there, help myself.
I see what you're saying. Almost like, the act of journaling, but it helps you be self-reflective and maybe notice things when you go back, as you said, and read through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is super interesting. I've recently been going back even through the latest book and reading a few different things. And we're very fluid at where we're at, right? We can have one thing that's an aha moment or clicks into place in context differently. And all of a sudden, our perspective changes. And I've read some things, I'm like, I'm thinking about that a little differently. And it hasn't been that long since the book was finished, just a few months. And so it's interesting how just those shifts can happen in such a short amount of time. So, that's ultimately what I hope people will just kind of latch on to is like, how does this compare to kind of what my experience is, and then look forward to, okay, maybe there's some things I think about, or maybe I just don't agree for this reason, right? As long as it's thought-provoking, then, mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. So your newest book, Sober is Better, My Note to Self, it really steps through your own story, really from your earliest childhood years, and shares more about your journey, how you became addicted, what that was like, and then ultimately what inspired or compelled you to make the decision to become sober. Would love to hear a little bit about that story. So maybe we could start towards the beginning. So maybe Tell me about your early years, say like before addiction became part of your life.
Yeah, and then that was the different part of book one to book two was I wrote specifically about my story, not just bits and pieces, but I really had to walk through it again, which is a fascinating experience for anybody. I recommend if you feel healthy emotionally, you should do that because there's just things that maybe you didn't remember in context that you get validated. It's like, oh, well, I didn't exactly remember that correctly. And it's kind of a cool experience. So I kind of start from the very beginning on my story that I was actually adopted, which plays into even current day, and I'm 50 years old. So I start from the very beginning. I was adopted out of Silicon Valley, out of California at birth, and literally went from sea level to the mountains within a few days. with my new parents to Wyoming. So I went from Redwood City, California, the heart of Silicon Valley, to the middle of Wyoming in the mountains.
Wow.
And so stark contrast right off the bat. My earliest years and memories are all just fairly normalized. Big family, like the adopted family, never missed a beat, never thought a thing about like adoption. I never felt that way growing up. And so they were pretty great. And there was huge family. We're talking like my parents had 25 aunts and uncles.
Wow.
That's a big family.
Oh, yeah.
So then at age 5, we moved away from everybody to the middle of Nebraska. So we go from the mountains to the Midwest. And like I had almost no family there. So I go from totally immersed and always having family around, always spending time with them, to like literally nobody, and except my immediate family. And I have a younger sister. And so that kind of really upset my emotional apple cart. And I didn't realize it, of course. My parents didn't realize it. Nobody did. That was a reintroduction of the unrealized trauma of when I went from, at birth, I was going from the 9-month relationship of where I had lived and grown to now that's completely changed and I don't know anybody. And that normalized. Right. And then I go to 5 years old and it happens again. And I don't think I knew why everything was just got all tumultuous. Like I had no idea. I mean, I really didn't understand this until like I was writing this book, is when I pieced all of it together. And so again, another byproduct of the book is you got to do your own work, right? So that's when things started to get a little, wonky for a little reason, and disconnected is probably a better reason, to where it's like, started school and it was a real small rural area. And so like I knew everybody, but it was that detachment, disconnected component that I started wrestling with even then. And it continued, and it didn't really get any better. And it just continued to get worse and worse, to where I just, I liked being around people, but I just didn't feel settled at all. Never did. Literally never did. And that's where I progressed into behavior that started to not be great, with not being honest about things and just, starting to get into little bits in trouble. But because I was a good student, nobody really said a lot about it. So I kind of was able to get by with a lot of stuff. Then it progressed into 12, 13, started really trying to find my way to feel different in a way that, wasn't a healthy coping skill. I was just trying to quiet the not feeling connected to people and not feeling connected to myself and just being out of place in the world. And then, found alcohol, and then, it was wheels off after that. That quieted things down. That was my answer. And that started a lot of years of just navigating that. And I was high functioning, as a term I'm sure you've heard used before. I mean, at high school, like I was a daily drinker and my parents didn't know.
Wow.
I think some of the students knew, and some of the teachers had an idea once in a while, but nobody really at the end of the day, except for the people that I was doing it with, had any idea that that was a daily occurrence at 15, 16, 17 years old. So it was kind of hiding and masking and manipulating and getting very good at that at a pretty young age.
So it was, as long as you were doing well in school, or you seemed like you were doing okay, it sounds like it wasn't obvious to as many people as it, maybe should have been, that you were having this issue with daily drinking. Now, was it to a point where you would appear drunk, or was it literally, just something that you started the day off to kill the pain, or maybe help connect with people? Or what was that experience like for you?
I was always surrounding myself with the safety net of people to help me navigate that. And we're talking well into adulthood. I was always able to find other people that would be like, this is Bryan being Bryan. So I was able to help find those, some could say codependents, some could say co-enablers, Some could say just able to look past it, whatever label you put on it. I had a group of people that are around me that if things started to get like way out to where I was going to get in trouble, they would help figure that out. And so it really truly was just trying to connect with people in the world and myself, if you get down to it. So, it would be mid-morning. It could be fairly early morning, could be mid-morning, it could be, lunch. Whenever the opportunity presented itself is when it started. And it never got caught enough to get into trouble of all the time, which it's not an indictment on anybody. I mean, it's what I was doing. And it just was, again, just everybody is managing what they're in charge of as far as like teachers and schools and coaches and everything. It never seemed apparently so bad so many times in a row that anybody kind of looked at it and went, okay, there's a problem. Or the other side of this is maybe they did, and I just don't have a really good recollection, right? So I never discount that. That's always a possibility. Is my memory on how that all went down has some element of distortion to it. So I've never, ever discredit that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear what you're saying there. So it sounds like alcohol was the first drug that you discovered there. Was it when you were 12 years old or before that?
It was, would always kind of like, okay, this is pretty cool, younger than that. But it really, like it was about 13. And the first time that I had the opportunity to go consume as much as I wanted to consume, I was actually 14. And that was the first time that I ever blacked out from alcohol, ever threw up from alcohol, had the behavior that, was definitely ill-advised and inappropriate from alcohol, got in trouble from alcohol. I mean, that literally was the first time that I had full license to just consume as much as I wanted to. And that was the launching point for, okay, I want to get back to that spot as many times and as much as I could, as often as I could after that.
Right. And then I understand you also developed an addiction to drugs as well while you were in your teen years. Is that right?
Yeah. And I wish I would say I was super unique about that, but being in recovery for quite a long time now, I've heard hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people's stories. And my story is exactly the same. It might have a little different shade of color here and there, but it's the same thing. Is once I had access when I got to college to other substances from alcohol, it literally was, okay, sure, I'll try it. And I had a couple areas where I'm like, no, zero interest in that, but it was very few and far between. I am not a huge fan, and thank goodness, but I'm not a huge fan of needles and giving blood or anything like that, which I do. But so that was always never even an option. I'm like, nope, hard pass. Don't want to watch it, don't want to be around it. So anything dealing with like a needle, I was like a hard no. I'm lucky that was the case because it could have always got worse. 18 was the very first drug I ever did was cocaine, which is weird. Most people don't go that route. They kind of ease into it, but I go right for, can I go faster, quicker, more often? And so that was kind of the start, and then backfilled with pretty much everything. I wasn't real discriminatory about it. So it was just the party, feeling different. So I kind of chased all that stuff for about 5 years pretty consistently, and then kind of knew I had to stop and graduated college. And then it was a lot less. And then finally about 9 years, there was a pretty big break, and then tried one more little experiment at about 9 years, and it was absolutely nothing that was of any value. So that was the final time. So it was about 5 years. It got pretty intense and pretty bad for quite a while there.
You struggled with addiction all through school, through college, and then you went on to have a long, successful career and still do have a successful career despite struggling with addiction for a very long time, many years with that. So what was it like to deal with addiction while simultaneously growing your career?
It was complete and utter madness. That's probably a great way that I can think back, just so chaotic because, I'm just trying to manage the steps forward. And again, it's much like school. I mean, I've always excelled in things. I mean, I work really hard. I'm just smart enough that I can figure things out. I'm definitely never the smartest person in the room and never the one that has the most trouble kind of thinking things through. So I'm right in the middle of the curve, but I work really hard and I get along with people generally. So kindness and working, extra hard and average intelligence will get you a long ways in this world. That's one thing that I've learned. Yeah. I just had opportunities that I seized the moment, and I was lucky to get what I was doing and get it a little bit quicker than other folks. And so I just surrounded myself with and they were talented people, and that helped keep me out of I wouldn't say, probably accountability is one thing, but circumstances or consequences, that's the word I'm looking for told you, I'm average. I'm not overly intelligent, just average. So it just kept the consequences at bay. And there were little ones that would come here and there, and I would just deal with them. And let me real quick, I'd kind of forgot about this, but to flash back to managing, what consequences are coming. I mean, at 19, I'd already had an attorney I was working with on retainer. Wow. To deal with the little things that were coming up that I didn't want to be big things. Oh. And so early on, I knew okay, I pushed the limits on things. I need to figure this out or life's going to get more complicated. Not fixing the usage and using alcohol and drugs, but just fixing the problems. I did the same thing in adulthood. The little things that would come up, I would just make sure and take care of them fairly thoroughly and judiciously to where they weren't big things. And I got really, really lucky a lot of times that it wasn't more significant, because there were some significant things and I was able to just kind of keep it moving despite those things and having success and parlaying that. And it was just more empty and more successful and more empty and more successful, and would just push the limits and then find kind of a break point. And at that point, I was able to kind of exit what I was doing graciously and parlay that into the next thing. I was able to do that for a very long time. And then I kind of hit a lull where I just had to start slowly dealing with a few things. And that was 6 or 7 years before I got sober into recovery. And so it's kind of a blur because I just was so unhappy and so just miserable and was just stepping along more sideways than forward, and not being unsuccessful, but definitely had a lull there and a plateau for many years right before I got sober, you could say.
Yeah. And the lull, was it like an emotional lull, like a strained relationships with family? Like, what did the lull look like? Because I guess you were doing well enough in your job for people not to suspect anything or to just sort of look the other way because you were performing in other ways. So what did the lull look or feel like?
So I went from a very successful corporate job to starting a couple of my own companies. That helps delay some of the performance issues because you got to navigate your own gig, so to speak, right? And it was slow, but we were successful in creating a couple things, which were eventually acquired by a company. And so in doing that, it was just a lull. I just was kind of detached from my family in that time. I lived in a different part of the country. I just really detached from everybody and everything. And then ended up moving, because that's one of the things that a lot of people that aren't in recovery, do is relocating is part of the solution. It's like, okay, if I go to a different place, I'm living in a different place, different people, different sunset, different, all these things, that's going to help fix the problem. And so folks that aren't in recovery just tend to do that. And I had a job early on where I could take different roles to fix different problems within a company that allowed me to, move around the world. And I would go fix something and I'd go to the next thing, and I'd go fix something, and I'd go to the next thing. And they were all different places. And so that kind of allowed me to parlay that. And then it was similar once I even had my own companies, is there were a couple moves in there which just allowed me to not have anything to do with, family, with former friends, anybody, because I just was able to go to a new place and kind of just start that process over again. So it's pretty foggy is probably a good word I guess I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. It seems like those years, and looking back, it was almost in slow motion because I just didn't know how to quit what was next. I didn't have any of the terminology or the way to, any of the tools to even think about it. It just was, I feel bad. This sucks. I don't like anybody. This isn't getting any better, to, hey, this feels better using. And then at some point it just doesn't work, right? That's the thing. It stops working. And when it stops working hard and fast, and to where you just can't ever get that again. So you're chasing not only wanting to feel better, but then chasing the old feeling. So you got this duality to the gap, right? You just got a bigger void that you've created yourself. And it just is a relentless, cruel, vicious cycle.
Yeah. And even though you lacked the tools to really maybe sort of deeply realize what was going on and find healthier ways to cope, it sounds like you learned specific systems and things that, as you said, worked for a while, like, having a lawyer on retainer, sort of being able to recognize when small problems were there so you could prevent them from becoming big problems, and realizing that, maybe moving jobs or moving locations could kind of delay the inevitable and, temporarily make you feel like you were in control and you were feeling better. And it's interesting, just tying back to your earlier years where the feelings of being uprooted and moved were so prominent in your early years, that as you grew in your career, you finally took control and continued to uproot yourself and move. But at least it's you doing this now. So a little different. But yeah, as you said, it works for a certain amount of time and then it just stops working after a while.
It does. And it is interesting. It's super cool you said that, because I've never equated, and that's the best part about recovery, and I'll finish my thought, is by sharing different things, people say something or have a perspective that you yourself didn't come up with, and you're able to apply it, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's the beauty of self-awareness and sharing kind of your story, is that somebody gives you a piece, there's a million pieces and somebody gives you the one piece, and it's like, oh, super interesting. So I never have thought about, like, me, again, an attempt to take control because it feels out of control is specifically the willingness to move, right? And try it again. And it just never gets any better. I get why we were doing that collectively as people that are in active addiction, but I never personally got like how I was just trying to take control of something that maps all the way back to what I couldn't control at, age 0, age 5. Mm-hmm. I was still chasing that. I never had that context before. So thank you. That was awesome.
You're welcome. Yeah. It's just such an honor and a privilege for me to hear stories where people are really willing to just be so open about their struggles and just be open about the fact that we don't have it all figured out yet. And we're always learning more and more about ourselves. And as you said earlier, sometimes looking back at our stories, takes a lot of work and a lot of inner strength, because I think all of us looking back, we'll find things that maybe we don't want to revisit or don't really want to dig into. So it takes a lot of strength to do that.
It takes a tribe. I kind of love that phrase, because they're a village. It's really one of the famous or infamous sayings in recovery meetings is that, your best efforts got you to the point of starting recovery.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so it takes a team. It takes a group of people. It takes more than yourself to do this. There's so many people that just their daily lives, I wish they had a recovery type community that they could just like crack it open. It doesn't matter what it is. Like they could just lay it out there and not feel bad about it. And, only feel bad about what's going on, not because they're saying it, not because of anybody judging, just because they just feel bad in general. I wish that more people had that, because it's an incredible gift to be able to literally put anything on the proverbial table, and there'll be people going, yeah, that happens, done it, seen it. Like, how can we help? Right?
Yeah.
There's no judgment. I mean, that just rarely happens. The recovery community is like, how do we help you process this? Like, what can we be of service to you? I mean, that's pretty rare, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I wish more people had those, because it sounds like a really great source of support.
Most definitely. It's one of the 100% absolute gifts. Hard road to get there, and it takes a lot of work, but it's family. Tulsa program is part of my recovery program. And I travel all the time to 12-step meetings all over the country. And it's so cool to walk in and like you are immediately like, hey, you're extended family. Come on in, sit down. We'd love to hear something about your story. All that stuff there's just doors are always open. And it's just so cool. It's hard to really put into place how nice it is to be able to have this family all over that truly, if you need something, they would do everything they could to try and help. Yeah. I mean, that's just a fact with my experience so far.
Yeah, that sounds like, as you said, a really great family of people who really understand you and are there for you when you need them. So we talked now a little bit about recovery, and you had mentioned the lull, as you said, that led up to you making the decision that you needed to really work towards being sober. So what was the turning point that propelled you to finally say, I don't want to be controlled by addiction anymore. I want to start recovery? Was it a particular incident, or did it happen over time?
With my story, I wouldn't say it was a specific incident. It was a scenario that, as I thought about it, it was in a professional setting, a scenario that I thought about, I was able to put into context that could be the beginning of things getting really bad, right? And I'd kind of had in the back of my mind, like, this is really progressing quickly to where at a point I don't care. That's the dangerous invisible line. When somebody crosses over and loses the really caring at all about what they're doing, that is an accelerant. It's rocket fuel to get so much work so much quicker. I was very, very fortunate that something clicked with really no incident, just a morning traveling after a long night, and it clicked that I didn't want to do this anymore. I'm like, something's got to change, or I don't think I'm going to make it to be very old, and I can't feel this bad any longer. And so it just was pretty definitive. And I knew somebody that had actually been sober for several years, somebody professionally that I'd got to be friends with personally. I knew their story. So I rung them straight away when I returned from the trip and met with them. And they're like, yep, here's kind of my story in its entirety. Here's where I went. Here's what I did. Here's how I felt. And I'm like, okay, just point me in a direction. Tell me what to do and I'll go do it. I need to try something different. And I did exactly what he shared, and that started it. I feel very, very fortunate. There's a lot of people that their stories get way messier, way more complicated, way more severe. And I'm fortunate that my elevator, as they say, didn't have to go to the very, very, very bottom floor possible and beyond. Mine went low enough. And that was just the way it worked.
Wow. So then the act of reaching out to your friend who helped guide you through that next part of the journey away from addiction to sobriety, what were some of the things that you did first to start that process?
I reached out, first of all, reached out and said, man, yeah, here's where I'm at. Here's how I'm feeling. This sucks. I need some help. He's like, here's where I went. If you don't like that place, here's 10 other places to go try, right? It might not click with you, but just keep trying until you find somewhere that clicks and just keep doing it no matter what. And so I literally right away started going to 12-step meetings, and I did a ton of meetings the first few months, every day, if at all possible. And then if I was out of town, because I traveled a few weeks after I stopped drinking, and I found meetings wherever I traveled, went to those meetings and just kept going to meetings and hearing things that people were saying in these meetings of how they dealt with stuff. And I would ask questions, and I would kind of try and connect with people, at least put forth the effort, because that's what they said to do, is you get connect with people, because you're disconnecting as in your wiring, isolating. And so true. I mean, it's still true today. I mean, I work on that at a constant basis. It is just not isolating, because it's just part of the pattern that, got burned in early on. And so, just kept going and listening and practicing and read, consumed, again, was always a pretty good student. So, I was told to do X, Y, and Z. I did X, Y, and Z. I mean, I consumed books and literature on kind of what the process is, what, solutions look like, approaches on it. I mean, all that stuff, and tried to connect with people that I felt like I had some shared experience with. And it was a great group to kind of get started with, and just kind of continued that and kept trying, and started slowly telling people about it, and just started building this small building blocks on top of that until I actually started feeling better, and life started looking better and feeling better and making more sense. Doesn't mean it's not complicated. I mean, life's complicated, but when you have tools to figure out the complexities of everyday living, there's always hope, right? I mean, that's the beauty of it. Is as tough as it is, you find ways, whether it's practicality, whether it's, connection, whether it's faith, whatever it is, you got to have those doses of hope, or things get really difficult. Because if you don't have any hope, you're alone. And doing things alone, truly, like there's nobody in the world that I can turn to, talk to, has never did it. Those feelings, those are really, really, I don't wish that on anybody. That's a tough place to be.
And that maybe ties back to what you were saying before about you not wanting to get to the point where you just don't care anymore. Because it sounds like that's really an abdication of hope or connection or anything at all. So it sounds like, you built those connections with people. You learned from them different ways to cope with some of the pain and the challenges that you faced that didn't involve alcohol. And then you found a way to keep a hopeful mindset and outlook on life. For recovery, I know we hear that it's a constant struggle, and I don't know that anyone ever 100% is cured, but are the meetings and the types of support that you get, is it still something that you do on a regular basis, or has it changed over time?
It ebbs and flows. I've been 9+ years of recovery, and half of it's been where I got sober and then, in the town. And then half of it's been where I moved to. So I had to kind of reestablish myself, which was a transition year, a few years in, and you move to a place you don't really know anybody, and you got to go jump completely back into the recovery community. Is a weird transition, because the meetings are different, the people are different. You're finding a lot of differences until you finally do it enough to where you're like, okay, I just need to let go of the differences and completely focus on the things that are going to help me recover. And those are all the similarities, and it's all the same. You just got to get used to something a little different. But today, I have a very regular cadence of, I like to go to a couple meetings a week. Sometimes it's one, but usually try and do a couple. I like to go one on the weekend, one on the weekday, because it kind of breaks it up a little bit. It doesn't let things stack up too far. And do that every single week. Have folks that I stay in touch with. Half the folks that I engage with on a regular basis are probably in recovery, half are not. And some people are very different. Some folks in recovery are 95% are all in recovery. And that's fantastic, because that's the way it works for them. Other people are 5% are, right? So there's no box or formula that's scientifically precise. It's what works for you to maintain, right? The maintenance on this whole thing, because you don't get cured. That, in my opinion, does not happen. It's maintenance. Sometimes maintenance is super easy, and sometimes maintenance is definitely challenging. But you hit a point that it's okay, it's good and bad days like everybody else, because everybody has good and bad days. Everybody has feeling further away and closer to what feels good. Being very centered and balanced. And And sometimes things get out of whack and you need to go recharge and kind of disconnect and put things back in priority. I mean, that's just daily living.
Right.
So, but yeah, I do it very similar to my early recovery is still very similar. I just have a cadence that feels good and it's my maintenance program. And sometimes I do more, sometimes because life gets busy, I do less. And then I figure out, I need to get back doing more. And I do. And that's just the way that it kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a maintenance process, but, just like everything else, there are some times where you need to do, maybe more maintenance than others. And it just sort of ebbs and flows, as you said.
Very much so.
The flow of life. So, wow. So I think a lot of people really could learn a lot from your story, just you being so candid with what you went through, what you were feeling, what it was really like, and just realistically, what addiction was like for you and what recovery was really like. For your new book that you've got out, Sober is Better, My Note to Self. When did that come out? Just earlier this year, right?
Yeah, actually May. I think it actually was released by the publisher, which I didn't realize this. You're a little behind in the publishing cycle. So it was actually released on 4/20, which is kind of ironic.
Oh.
I like the poetic irony of that. But we released it on May 1st, if I'm not mistaken, of this year.
Yeah. So, it's been out now for, we're recording this towards the end of July. So I guess, maybe 2.5 months or so. Have you gotten any feedback from readers who have read your book, or have you heard any particular meaningful comments from readers about how it's impacted them?
Oh my gosh, those are the best. Like those are the ones that really just reinforce that the year of work and just putting yourself out there was beyond worth it. And I mean, probably once a week, I get something from somebody. Literally just got something this morning of somebody that I haven't talked to in, 10 years that reached out and is in the middle of some things that I'm able to relate to and at least give some perspective on my experience because they were just at a breaking point where they just had to get some help. And it's been 8-9 years since I've actually seen and talked to them. Bought the book, reading the book, knew they needed to reached out. And we were able to go back and forth with just framing like, okay, what's going on? Just get me up to speed on kind of, your story, so to speak. And I was able to offer some perspective on my experience in a similar situation. And I hope it helped. It got me thinking about things that I think about. So I know it helped me just having somebody have me relate my perspective, right? It always helps. You always get more. That's the part about sharing and helping is you always get more, when you're in service to people, places, and things, no matter what it is. I truly feel that I always get more out of it than I put into it. And I could be putting everything I could possibly into it. And I still feel so good about it. And always. And I love that rule. Love it.
That's the greatest thing is when you create something that's so personal and it has an impact on people's lives. Even if it's just one person, that makes it worth it. If it's one person that, you cause them to think a different way or change their mind or move towards recovery. And, in the book, it hasn't been out that long yet. So I definitely believe it will have impact on even more people as time goes on. So that's really remarkable.
Literally, it's probably been, I would say 20 to 25 people have reached out just in a few months because I've had one speaking engagement with a corporation and there were some really, really candid discussions there, which was unbelievably powerful to be a part of. I mean, I think I'm super hyper aware of kind of maybe where people are at and what's going on. And I kid myself because I've had people reach out that are just totally struggling and I never would have had any idea. And so that's, one of the lessons to myself is that I'm reminded of all the time is you really don't know where anybody else is. I know where I am at, and that's really all that I can do. And so it helps, definitely not be judgmental because that's a pretty human trait and just look at people as people. I'm definitely, I think, pretty good at that because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what led up to that. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Like I tend to give a lot of people a benefit of the doubt on like responses and just bad days and stuff. It's like, okay, it's not that it's okay right? But they're not a terrible person. They could just be having a cumulative worst day of their life. I mean, I don't know that. And so I tend to give a lot of leeway on that stuff, and looking at my own side of the street and managing that, because that's plenty on a daily basis. It's just managing my own stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So yeah, Bryan, thank you so much for being on the show. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your book or your speaking?
Sure. Thanks for asking. And again, thanks for having me on the show. It's been fantastic. They can go to the website. So bryanwempen.com, BRYANWEMPEN.com. And they can always email me at info@bryanwempen.com, or it's all on the website. That has what I speak on. That has all the books I've written. That's got some of the blog stuff that I do. I mean, it's kind of got all of it right there. And anybody can definitely track me down and find me. There's no doubt about that, which I hope they do. If something comes up or they want to, reach out about something, that's part of the deal, is you got to give it away to keep it. Mm-hmm. And that's just a core tenet that I believe in, is I'll take those calls and those conversations all day long if it's helping somebody.
Oh, fantastic. And I'll put the link to your website in the show notes of the podcast so people can find it easily there too.
Great. Thank you very much.
As we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know, or anything else that they can help or support you with?
The biggest thing is just whether you're supporting somebody that's struggling, and it could be mental health, it could be, substance, it could be a lot of things. Just be willing to look past how it feels and see where to help that person. And if you're somebody struggling, just be willing to try and figure it out and ask for help, because it's really hard to do it yourself. It's almost impossible. So just find somebody to help you. So those are my closing thoughts.
So important. Thank you so much again for being on my show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a shout out on your social media, or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.